Hey friends, this is Joseph Maynor. So what I want to do in this video is I want to I've been spending a lot of time on spirituality lately, a lot of time on actualize.org, communicating with a lot of people, and just really intense spiritual stuff. I mean, it's been a month since I've made a video. That's for a reason. It's just I've been, you know, really kind of working really hard on spirituality. And so, what I want this video to be is, you know, I wanted to do two things. The first thing I wanted to do is I wanted to kind of tell that story. And the second thing I want to do is I want to review my own kind of tier or module two system so that you guys kind of understand like kind of where I'm coming from. But then again, realize, my whole spirituality is based on not telling you what reality is. See, this is where I differ from a lot of other quote unquote spiritual sharers, right? Is I don't want to tell you what reality is, right? That makes me totally the antithesis of many spiritual sharers out there. Because the whole thing, my whole teaching style is to get you to get on the path and kind of go through these things that I went through, but on your own, with your own language, your own terminology, your own conclusions, your own direct experience, right? So this makes me very different from, I'm like 99.9% of all spiritual sharers / teachers out there. So, I've been spending a lot of time on actualize.org, talking with a lot of people. And it's really been definitely not a waste of time. You know what I mean? Because this is what I'm working on right now. And, one of the things is that my microphone actually broke too. So hopefully the sound isn't horrible in this video. It's not going to be great, but hopefully it's not going to be horrible. I'm actually getting a new microphone, so that should be coming in via Amazon in a couple of days now. So the first thing I want to say also that makes my sharings unique is I don't have a duality between the finite and the infinite. In other words, I don't crap all over the human like a lot of spiritual teachers will do. Right? I see that there's a joining between the human and the divine. Now you're going to have to go through a phase where you're going to feel like you have to drop something. That's part of the path. See, what I'm doing is I'm speaking from what I think is kind of the highest level, right? Which is different from what everybody else thinks is the highest level. Notice that? Like every spiritual sharer has their own spirituality and they're never going to agree. This is why absolute love is so important. Okay, so anyway, I've kind of come to these conclusions that nobody's going to agree. It's not really my role to preach at anybody as to what reality is. People are going to do that to me, and I've had to deal with that, kind of spiritual arrogance aspect. Because, look, when people think they have the truth, or the absolute truth even, they, in a certain kind of way, become unbearable, right? As a matter of social relation. And so this is why truth is actually different than love. Right? So I don't see truth, love, goodness, beauty as one thing. For me, it's a stepwise motion. You can look at it one thing. It's a difference in perspective. It's like looking at, looking at a pair of scissors, right? So you got a pair of scissors. If I do this, it looks like two things, right? But if I do this, it looks like one thing. See? So it's a matter of perspective, the one and the many, right? Sometimes, you pick up the one and then you put it down. Sometimes you pick up the many and you put it down. Okay. So it just depends on what is wise in the moment. And this is why I actually put wisdom at the highest level, not truth. So for me, it's truth, love, beauty, wisdom. And in my last video, I talked about this from a Zen standpoint, but what I want to do in this video is actually kind of want to, if you watch my last video, it's right at the very end where I talk about feminine beauty, this is going to be a great follow-up to that video. Because I realized, oh yeah, I've talked about all this stuff in my prior videos, but I need to make one video where I kind of summarize my point of view and why I reached the point of view that I did too. And to have the balls to actually tell you guys a lot of things that I try not to say. So for example, I try not to talk about psychedelics in my videos because that can be taken the wrong way by certain people, right? So you're kind of afraid, oh, if I talk about psychedelics, I'm going to be labeled as something or, like that. But look, if I don't at least mention the fact that I've used psychedelics and how that factored into my path, in a way, I'm not being truthful, right? I'm not being honest. I may be somewhat unwise, right, doing that, because people will make judgments about you. When you anything, they'll call it a drug, right? Oh, you did psychedelics. Oh, that's the same thing as whatever. People who haven't had these experiences really can draw some pretty discriminatory conclusions. And so this is where wisdom factors into it. But at the same time, if I don't talk about this stuff, then why am I even sharing, right? I have to be honest as to my path. And so that's what I want to do in this video. And so we'll basically go through what, sort of my module 2. If you guys look at my About section on my YouTube channel, we'll go through my module 2 and I'll kind of break it out as to how I do it. But again, realize I'm just sharing this with the ultimate aim of not telling you what reality is and having you find your own path. It's an analogy. My sharing and teaching is based on an analogy. It's not based on a direct one-to-one. Like, I'm not telling you this is what reality is, this is what you should believe. If you don't believe me, you're wrong. No, right? That's not what I want to do. And I totally realize the shortcomings of that perspective now. So, okay, friends, just give me 1 second. I'm going to take a break. I'll come back and we'll jump right into the material. Okay, friends, welcome back. So I think the first thing I want to talk about a little bit is psychedelics. And my point of view is that psychedelics are useful on the spiritual path. Why is that? Because psychedelics are direct experience. See, and there's a big problem in spirituality where you don't have enough direct experience to draw the kinds of conclusions that you want to draw for your own spirituality. So for example, you may read a lot of books. Well, all of that is hearsay, actually. Every book is hearsay when it comes to spirituality. You may do a bunch of meditation or Kriya Yoga or something along these kinds of lines. But that isn't giving you the answer either. It's not giving you the deep recognition of what certain things are in spirituality. And this is where psychedelics can actually be useful. And the thing is that this is a delicate subject because a lot of people will think of psychedelics as like, they'll classify it as all of it is drugs, right? And of course, nobody wants anybody to go crazy. But from my experience, different psychedelics are useful at different places on the path. So, for example, mushrooms, right, are totally different than 5-MeO-DMT. DMT, NN-DMT is totally different from LSD, right? Cannabis can vary between smoking it and edibles. Edibles are totally different, right, than smoking or vaping it, right? So instead of thinking of psychedelics or psychoactive drugs, I'm not talking about like, I don't want to get too much into this, guys. I'm already kind of, walking a fine line. But I'm just saying, the conclusion that I want to get to here is that different psychedelics are useful at different places. And I want to kind of explain that. So the first really topic for me is truth, right? Truth is not the highest stage on the path. It's almost like the entry, the newbie stage on the path, the intro stage. But it's like algebra, right? You can't really do calculus without algebra. So you have to have a real sense of truth with a capital T to do spirituality. You have to be solid in your, it's not even faith. It's not even belief. It's direct knowing, right? Self-realization or just realization, that kind of thing. Like it's a knowing. It's a pillar without being a pillar. Okay, that's what absolute truth is. You're no longer needing somebody to tell you. You're not trusting anybody. You're not operating on faith at all at this point. It's known, but it's not a belief. It's known, but it's not a belief. It's a recognition. Okay, this is what truth is. And I break it into two parts. I call the first part feminine absolute truth, and the second part masculine absolute truth. So feminine absolute truth is the recognition that there's something beyond the ego. Okay, this is where you might do any number of psychedelics and have this realization. A good psychedelic for this, I don't want to get this fine grained with that, but because I look at it like, you will go through your own psychedelic experience, right? And I want you to have that, right? For yourself, and make of that as to what you want. But I think the first, feminine truth is a realization that reality is a network of perspectives, and that everything ultimately is one. Everything ultimately is one. But the one is the network of all the perspectives. Right? The one, the one versus the many. So notice how absolute truth is I call this the metaphysical stage on the path. You start to realize that actually the network is the whole. And I'm just a node in the network. But the network itself is the being, the one. Right? So you start to see that everything is one. Right? It's kind of the first truth phase that I went through, and that I have when I talk about truth. The second truth phase is the I am, right? This is different. This is where you realize that when I thought of myself as a node in a network, where the network is the whole is really the primary thing. Everything is one. So the one is the primary thing, and then it's a whole network of perspectives or complex adaptive systems. Okay, so this is something along the lines of like Spinoza, where God slash nature is what ultimately exists, and the egos within God, or the finite perspectives within God, are part of God, but they're partial, and they're dependent upon the whole for their existence. So this is kind of like feminine truth. Everything is one. And this is where you start really, your ego gets into high relief at this point. You start recognizing ego in yourself. Ego becomes an issue. If you're talking heavily, like everybody, you know, the ego this, the ego that, the ego this, the ego that, you're probably going through this kind of feminine truth phase where you're all of a sudden you're totally conscious of the limitations of ego in yourself and in others. And you realize that God slash nature is the whole. And all of us are a part of that. But you're certainly not going to say, I am, right, that, yet, right? Okay. Well, that's the next stage, is the I am that. See? I am the whole. Now, but the whole is not the sum of its parts. The whole is awareness or consciousness of the parts. And you will have a realization that what you are is not a part, or it's like man versus God, right? At the last stage. Or the part versus the whole, the many versus the one. Okay, that's the feminine truth. Masculine truth is that there is only one, and I am it. The I am, self-realization, self with a capital S realization. So what's happening here is you're having a shift in identity from an egoic I to a non-egoic I. This is masculine truth. And there's certain psychedelics that are good for this, that will actually show you this. In fact, I'm not going to name the psychedelic, but I had a realization of this, actually, where, I basically realized that I am awareness itself. It wasn't like a conclusion that I came to. It wasn't it's like how much logical thought do you need to know that you exist and how you exist? You don't, right? So it was just like all of a sudden I realized, without even thinking about it, the thinking came later, but I realized, oh wow, I'm actually the awareness. I'm not, the finite perspective that I thought I was. And I distinctly knew that without thinking when I was doing this trip. And that is something that I will never forget. Okay, that was just one trip. I've done, a lot of trips, but that was one that I'll never forget. And it really, people will try to pick me apart sometimes, and they'll say, explain what the I am is. And I'll say, well, it's that, saying, be the atmosphere, not the clouds. That's a really good pointer. Be the atmosphere, not the clouds. Because what that trip showed me, and it showed it to me in direct experience. It wasn't like, some conclusion that I came to or anything like that. It was like, oh shit, I am awareness itself. That fits that pointer, right? That's a really good pointer. Be the atmosphere, not the clouds. That's actually a really good pointer. because that's exactly what was shown to me. And so that's what the I am is. The I am is not an egoic I. Okay, but it's a recognition that what you thought you were before is not what you actually are, but it's not through language, it's through direct experience, direct knowing. Like, whoa, dude, like, I'm this thing. I didn't think I was this thing. Now I realize I'm this thing. Wow. That's the experience. That's the I am. Is that you are, and I'm going to give you a pointer here. People have criticized me for this pointer, but you're the container of all the finite perspectives. Right. Your identity is very different from like what you thought it was. So those are the two, I call these the metaphysical phase on the path. These are the two that I like to break apart, into, to the extent that I have to do that. And so what I want to do is I want to take a break and come back, and I want to talk about love, beauty, and wisdom in a similar way. So just give me 1 second. Okay, friends, welcome back. So in my view, love is not equivalent to truth. Love requires truth as a foundation, though. Absolute love. I'm talking about absolute love. And absolute love does not mean being this egoless ego, treating everything the same. That is not, see, that's a false start. That's a false start. Actually, what it is, it's a reduction of absolute love to absolute truth. Because you think absolute truth is the highest value. No, because there's one thing that happens with love. Because I break love into two phases, again, the feminine love, masculine love. One key thing that happens with absolute love is you come back down to earth. So instead of thinking that the absolute is the absolute doesn't know the finite, right? I mean, that's terrible for love, right? But people say, oh, yeah, the absolute doesn't know the finite. Well, yeah, because you're trying to reduce love to truth, right? So instead of that kind of hierarchical mentality, really the key to love is to realize that the absolute and the finite are linked together. They're joined. In other words, you don't lose anything from your realization of absolute truth. It's always there, right? You're never going to forget it, right? It's always there, because if it wasn't always there, it wouldn't be absolute truth. But what absolute love is where you come back down to earth and you reintegrate the finite perspective somewhat, but from a detached kind of witness perspective as well. So there's a joining between the absolute and the infinite and the finite. The infinite being the self with a capital S, or the one with a capital O, right? But there's a joining or a relation or a link between that and the finite perspective that's showing up in Maya, in creating within Maya, ultimately. And so I break love into two parts. So love is not about losing your ego. Love is actually about reintegrating your ego. See? People who don't get that, they're stuck at truth. And there are a lot of people like this, actually. You'd be surprised. And the people who are integrating love, like they haven't fully integrated truth. So this is a big sticking point, in terms of my life coaching services. I can help a lot of people kind of solve this problem, from my perspective. I can give a sharing that might influence how you think about it, because ultimately the first part of truth the first part of love is kind of a Jungian reintegration of the ego, but understanding that it's an ego. And so coming to terms with the limitations of ego, which actually is the shadow. So you're doing a lot of shadow integration at this place. You're conscious that everybody else has an ego and are at different phases of doing shadow integration. The second part, or the second part of love, from my perspective, masculine love, I chalk up to Zen. Chop wood, carry water, pick things up, put things down as necessary. And at this point, you know, you have a Buddha nature, which is basically the link between the absolute and the finite. You have this Buddha nature now. So you're not lost in metaphysical abstraction, right? But at the same time, you're not conscious of yourself as a creator. So I'm kind of rushing through these a little bit. So the first, I talked about this in my last video. This is where I'm going to slow down a little bit. In my last video, I talked about feminine beauty, okay? As realizing that you have the ability to be a creator and almost like an actor in scenes or contexts with other actors. So instead of seeing yourself as like a nothing, you're seeing yourself as an actor showing up in the world, consciously creating with other people. And then there's masculine beauty, which is being conscious that you're the only creator. Right? You're the only creator. This is where people talk about, you know, God imagining reality being a certain way. Right? Like everything is my imagination, everything is my creation as the divine. Okay, this is kind of masculine beauty, right? Notice how very different this is from truth, right? Truth isn't really concerned necessarily with this aesthetics. So we go from like truth to ethics to aesthetics and then ultimately to wisdom, right? So everything isn't reduced to truth. Like artists don't care about epistemology, right? Artists really don't care about epistemology. But when you're doing truth, you care about epistemology. Artists care about creation, creating good artworks. And what is a good artwork is going to be whatever you create at this point of masculine beauty. And you're creating everything, right? See, so what I haven't talked about a lot yet is the highest stage in my sharings or teachings, which is wisdom. So what I want to do in the last maybe 5 minutes of this video is go over, because I've learned, this is actually where I've learned a lot. Maybe I'll do 10 minutes here, go a little over 30. But this is what I've really learned a lot about recently is breaking beyond the breaking beyond beauty and moving into wisdom, but standing on top of all of these, right? Standing on top of the human truth, love, beauty, and then like what goes beyond, what comes beyond beauty, what comes beyond the creator imagining reality into existence. Right, that's kind of the question, the next question. So just give me 1 second. All right, friends, welcome back. So a great example of masculine beauty would be like an artist kind of like Miles Davis, right? An artist that just keeps kind of moving the goalposts of, you know, everything they're doing, but also conscious that they're the creator, right? They're the one. They're taking full responsibility for creation. But it's, at the same time, you also realize that everything that's happening is your creation as well. Because remember, there's a link between the absolute and the finite. Now, feminine wisdom. Feminine wisdom is really important because, in a way, it's kind of a joining back, a grounding. It's a grounding. But you have all this stuff underneath you. But you have to realize, okay, with feminine wisdom, is that the things you say and do matter and depend the appropriateness of them should be factored in. That there's, like, yeah, you realize that you have the absolute truth, you have absolute love, you have absolute beauty. You realize you're an actor, you're a creator, but you still have to take some kind of responsibility to be group level wise in life, despite having all of this. So feminine wisdom is about being wise in relation. It's about knowing where you are, knowing the rules, kind of understanding ego and how things are going to show up in the world, and being careful about creation and relation and truth telling, and being a human as well. Being cautious in relation, knowing where you are, not walking around blind without a cane. Right? See, that's feminine wisdom. That's very important. What is masculine wisdom? Well, this is my highest teaching. Because remember, you got all this stuff up underneath you. Masculine wisdom is making a decision, making wise decisions for yourself. Making wise decisions for yourself. Solo. Realizing that you are the wise, the only agent that could be wise. And taking responsibility for that. So this could be making decisions about what you do when. What kind of truth do you tell? What kind of love do you share? What kind of beauty do you create? Not for others, but for yourself, and making decisions about that. But also standing on top of all this other stuff too. So, okay, friends. So this is the first time I've kind of made one video that spread a lot of things out, and that kind of not spread a lot of things out, but it did that too. Kind of summarized kind of how I view, my sharings, my spiritual sharings, and of course, I respect everybody who has a different point of view, because again, this is love. Love. I'll give you one insight here. If you're too focused on truth, you're not going to have love, because love means I don't care who you are, right? You're okay to have the spirituality that you have, whether you're a Christian, whether you have mental illness, whether you are a scientist, whether you are blah. I don't care, right? Because I'm not my ego doesn't want to control how you think about reality at all. I have no interest in that, because I realize I'm not entirely the ego anyway. If I were doing that, that would be kind of like ego, right? I mean, come on. Because the reality is I realize that everything that's here is good. See, Everything that's here is being, in some sense, created by me too. But I'm also not, it's kind of like yes and no, because I'm also showing up in the world as a finite perspective. So you do have to have some wisdom. You can't just run around like a chicken with your head cut off doing all kinds of crazy stuff. You're going to end up killing yourself. People do. People die, doing stupid things. So, wisdom is important too. You don't want to become so spiritually conscious that you think you can, walk through walls or something like that. I mean, you're going to find out really fast that you can't do that, right? So in part, everybody is a finite perspective too, including me. So I don't throw the ego under the bus. I don't throw my own ego under the bus. But I realize too, see, I just know, right, like how all this stuff, for me, I know how it all fits together. And people are going to disagree with me, and that's fine. I want you to. But at the same time, don't try to like shove your spirituality down my throat because I have my own. You know what I mean? And you do too. So again, we get into this like teaching versus sharing thing. And I'll give you one final comment about psychedelics. Like, why are psychedelics important? Because psychedelics, in a way, kind of get you up under your own ego. That's what they do, right? They show you what ego is. And they show you reality beyond the ego. That's why psychedelics are important. So don't think that, oh yeah, if I meditate for 100 years or I do Kriya Yoga forever, that's not going to be the same as, right, having psychedelic experiences. And I'm not saying that all psychedelic experiences are profound. No, right? But it's something that I would be like, just not being honest if I didn't say that psychedelics were important. But I don't want to be a psychonaut. I don't want to be somebody who gets into all the raw details about all the different psychedelics. There are people out there who will do that, but ultimately you have to decide to engage that and do it responsibly, right? Don't do it recklessly. So I don't want to be in the business of advising anybody about doing psychedelics, but I have to say, doing psychedelics were important for my path, and okay. And then, kind of in conclusion, I've had a little bit of a modification to my theory of masculine beauty, where I really did a lot of work there, where I realized I'm the creator. The difference between creation and the creator, right? I did a lot of work on that over the last few months, and I came to some kind of profound insights there. So I've made some development with regard to my theory of masculine beauty, which is the creator. The creator that's imagining reality, right? The one creator. But also not divorced. When you say imagine reality, right? Reality is there too. You're not just invisible man, right? There's a link between the absolute and the finite. See? And then with regard to wisdom, I learned a lot of lessons here about unhinged creation. The problem with beauty, the reason why you need wisdom after beauty, is because once you become conscious that you're a creator, sometimes you can go a little cray-cray that way, right? And people, those of you guys who have known, Connor Murphy recently passed away, He was very conscious that he was an actor, very conscious that he was a creator. I think he was pretty enlightened as well. So you need wisdom in a way to kind of rein in the creator, both from a feminine perspective and then ultimately from a masculine perspective. The feminine is about relation, the masculine is about the individual. Okay, friends, I'm out of time. I'll talk to you soon. Take care.